The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 9th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax collection station, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came and were sitting with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." While he was saying these things to them, suddenly a leader came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. Then suddenly a woman who had been suffering from a flow of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak. For she was saying to herself, "If only I touch his cloak, I will be made well." Jesus turned, and seeing her, he said, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." And the woman was made well from that moment. When Jesus came to the leader's house and saw the flute players in the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl got up. And the report of this spread through all of that district. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
I invite the congregation to be seated. So we have a healing service today, and those of us who are doing the praying usually ask the person who comes up if there's anything in particular that they would like a prayer for. Some ask for specific things for themselves or for a loved one. Some express their need for healing in more general terms. And some pray for healing of our country, or that war would stop, or for immigrants who live in fear. I think most often we think about physical or emotional healing. But there are many other kinds of wounds and brokenness. Every injustice, every exclusion, every break or tear in the human community, every scar on the earth cries out for healing. Jesus came to announce and enact the kingdom of God, the rule of God. The rule of God where shalom is the main characteristic. Shalom is the Hebrew word for peace, and it is such a rich and powerful word because it's not just no violence or war, though that is part of it. It's not just the absence of violence, it's the presence of justice. A holistic justice, where relationships between people and the earth are dominated by love and care. As we think about the ministry of Jesus, I think it's possible to describe everything he did as healing. Healing in the sense of moving toward the wholeness of shalom. Even turning over the tables of the money changers in the temple was an act of calling attention to injustice, taking advantage of the poor, something that needs to end as we move toward shalom. We have 3 stories in our gospel reading today, and in the past, I've seen them as a call story, Matthew being called to follow Jesus, and 2 healing stories. But I can see now that they are all healing stories. And maybe there are even 4 healing stories. If you see the dinner with tax collectors and sinners as separate from Matthew in the tax booth. Let's take a look at them. The first one is very short and to the point. Jesus sees a man and calls him to follow him, to be one of his disciples. And it's a lot like when Jesus calls the fishermen who leave their nets and boats behind. The difference is that Peter, Andrew, James, and John had normal, respectable jobs. Matthew is a tax collector. We might be thinking of an IRS regional rep, and that's also a respectable job. But that's not what Matthew's doing. He's more like a low-level mafia man, whose job it is to shake down the neighbors who owe his boss money. Average people saw tax collectors like Matthew as evil, people you'd stay as far away from as possible. They were often people with some kind of mental or physical disability who likely had a hard time getting other work. So they collected taxes for the Romans and typically took more than was owed to pad their wallets. Not just collaborators with the occupiers, but corrupt as well. Jesus' ability to recruit is impressive. There is something so compelling that when he asks people to follow him, they do, seemingly with no hesitation. Matthew gets up and follows and leaves the tax collection station without looking back. Now, I can only imagine what the other disciples are saying to each other. What is he doing? This is the beginning of the end. No one will join us now. My family will never let me hear the end of it. Watch your wallet. As far as we know, there is no orientation session where Matthew is told that he needs to clean up his act to be part of the group. No, instead, Jesus leads them to an impromptu dinner at Peter's house, a dinner where tax collectors and sinners are the guests. Now, in this context, sinners is a polite way of describing sex workers. They were almost certainly teenagers because most sex workers died very young. One writer described the guests as misfit hoodlums and adolescent sex workers. And there are so many of them that they've spilled out into the courtyard and onto the street because they can't all fit in the house. Healing is happening on so many levels in this story. These tax collectors and sex workers are sitting at a table with Jesus and the disciples. Instead of being used, instead of being looked on with disgust, they are being served and welcomed, treated like they are part of Jesus' community. People who have lived in shame are being honored. Matthew's name actually means gift of the Lord. I'm guessing he spent a good part of his life not believing his name. But somehow Jesus sees the truth of his name. He sees the value in Matthew when no one else can, and treats him as the gift that he is. This is deep healing for Matthew and the other tax collectors and sex workers, but it goes beyond them. This healing, this moving toward the wholeness of shalom, is extended to the disciples and to the wider community who are having their narrow views broken wide open. With this impromptu dinner party, Jesus is giving the whole community an experience of what the love of God looks like and what God's will for the world is. Throughout this Gospel of Matthew, it's the religious leaders who are in conflict with Jesus and his unorthodox ways. But one of these leaders comes up to Jesus and kneels down in front of him, begging him for help. My daughter has just died, but I know that you can make her live again." It's good to notice that Jesus doesn't say, "Oh, now you believe in me. Every other word out of your mouth has been about how I'm doing it all wrong. I'm here with these sinners that you won't even see as human. You think your needs come before theirs? Well, this time you need to wait your turn." No, Jesus doesn't say that. Instead, he gets up and goes with this religious leader. Jesus sees him for who he is, a distraught father. No one is excluded from mercy. And again, this becomes a wider kind of healing because the disciples go with Jesus. And undoubtedly, many of the people at this dinner party also got up and went with Jesus because he's the one who's made them feel like their lives are worth something too. So there's this whole community of people who ordinarily wouldn't be anywhere near each other, moving through the streets of Capernaum. And maybe it was that crazy mix of people that gave the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years the cover to get close enough to Jesus to touch the fringe of his cloak. As someone with bodily fluids flowing out of her, she was seen as ritually unclean, and she needed to keep her distance from other people. This woman, who has been on the fringes of her community, is in the middle of it all. She is physically healed, and she is called daughter, part of the family. The community is again made more whole, and this woman's endurance and faith can become a gift for others in the community. The group arrives at the leader's house, and Jesus takes the girl by the hand, and she gets up. In the gospel accounts of Jesus' ministry, 3 people are raised from the dead, and she is one of them. Matthew got up from his tax collection booth. The leader's daughter got up. In each case, the word used could also be translated as was resurrected. That's literally true for the girl. She was raised from the dead. But it's also true for Matthew, who's been in such a dead-end job and cut off from the life of the community. And neither one of them did anything to deserve this gift of healing and new life. If anything, they'd done the opposite. They'd been against the way of mercy and compassion. Matthew and the girl's father, in their own ways, had been in systems that were driven by calculation. What you owed, how much good you've done. New life and the wholeness that is the shalom of God is not about earning or deserving. At the core of this wholeness is extreme compassion and grace. It is all gift. This was hard for the disciples to wrap their heads around, and it's hard for us to wrap our heads around. It's hard to believe that this is the way God is. I was in a gathering online this week with faith leaders and families of people who are at the protests at Delaney Hall in New Jersey. And as you might know, this is an immigrant detention center where the conditions are horrible. And the people in detention have been on a hunger strike in an effort to improve their conditions and be treated fairly in the judicial process. Clergy and other people of faith have literally been on the front lines and have been the first people tear gassed and pepper sprayed. So in the middle of this call, a young woman whose husband is detained was sharing her story, and she became distraught. Not over what was happening to her husband, but what she had just learned had happened to another man who was detained. This man had been in the United States for 30 years. His wife and his children and his grandchildren are all citizens. He's been a productive member of the community, a taxpayer. He's committed no crimes. And that day, he was told by an immigration judge that he would be deported in 24 hours. The young woman relaying the story was beside herself, tearfully talking about how a whole family is being destroyed. It was so intense, I had to put it on mute because it was upsetting baby Landon. The Matthew in this story might be the Geo Group workers who make Delaney Hall run. Matthew might be the Geo Group security workers or the ICE agents who are countering the protesters with violence. Matthew might even be the immigration judge who is trying to keep his job. These are the people who Jesus refuses to leave out, while still standing right next to the immigrants whose families are being ripped apart. Speaking honestly, this is extremely hard. At the beginning of the call, a priest who had been ministering in Delaney Hall offered a beautiful prayer, and early in the prayer, he called on God to transform the hearts of the workers and the ICE agents and the judges. I don't easily pray those prayers on my own, and I was grateful to be in a community that was doing that. Because deep down, I know it is the way of Jesus. The way that never gives up on offering new life to anyone, no matter what they've done. Not because they deserve it, but because they need it. That's the foundation of the wholeness called shalom. Thanks be to God. Amen.